Yara is a practicing architect and academic interested in design as a tool to rethink contested landscapes with a new take on architectural practice. She sheds a light on forgotten communities whilst also interrogating the relationship between politics and architecture. Her work runs parallel between her practice NG Architects in London and design studio at the University of Westminster. She co-founded Architects for Gaza, as well as Palestine Regeneration Team, PART, a design-led research group that aims, through speculative and live projects, to search for creative and responsive spatial possibilities in fragmented landscapes. Yara's work through research and design intersects to disrupt colonial power with its supremacy and hierarchy of knowledge production. Instead, she calls for an alternative narrative and expression in architectural and spatial practice that is inclusive for all. Thank you, Yara. A hand over to you.
So, as Turanj mentioned, part of Palestine Regeneration Team, mainly looking at uncertain landscape, contested geography, invisible community, and what architecture could mean. So a lot of what I've been doing is to engage with the politics of the place, in my case, Palestine and the UK, question the role of urban practice, heritage, landscape, but also think whether subversion could become a tool for an alternative ideological practice that kind of combats the destruction of space. I've always been interested in the notion of the map, being somebody who's Palestinian. So this aspect of the gradual undisciplining of the map, the critiquing, and also reading the map with relation to power, not as neutral scientific document, is really very fundamental in the way that I have been working, but also Palestine Regeneration Team have been working. And white as the marker and the eraser on the politics of the skin, which I will be showing today, is part of this research by design journey that I have been doing with Nasser Golzari to explore the Palestinian landscape, but also think of an alternative narrative to the colonial one that has often been imposed on us in Palestine. So white as the marker and the eraser question the so-called modernization that has been imposed on Palestine as a colonial tool to erase. Culminated from a long year research, it forms part of our attempt to particularly rethink and challenge the white city of Tel Aviv, which has been claimed with its international style to become the local vernacular in that region. Particularly, I am interested in also narrating Yafa or Jaffa, which is where Tel Aviv is built on its land, to narrate its current scene, which has been cluttered, distorted, and contaminated. I think one of the key aspects as working as on the issue of Tel Aviv and the white city is really to argue that the architecture of the white city, due to its denial of the place, of the existing cultural and physical heritage of Palestine, due to its colonial ideology, unlike what it claims, is that it failed to address really the social and some of the original social aspiration of the modernist movement, missing some key social aspects that they were calling for them. So a lot of the white city of Tel Aviv typologies ended up looking like inward, looking citadels, very much against the street, and very much unlike the view of Jaffa itself, which has the street as its key spinal cord relating to the city and the social fabric. And this aspect is not my only kind of observation, but it was also the observation of a lot of the architects who were thinking about designing Tel Aviv and designing this new vernacular identity. A lot of them have been critiquing what a modernist architecture means in a context of a Mediterranean region like Palestine. Somebody like Posner, He said that Tel Aviv has been spending all its life trying to dress and undress, where white became a condition but also became a self-inflicted lack. Modernist, others also call it white as a modernist spell, lack of status and orientation. The white is a misconstructed affirmation, really, of a Western identity. Excuse me. I am also sorry for not being with you. One of the reasons is because I'm late. So really, building on this research of European modernism, which is, it also kind of tackles two strands, the international style, but also the strand which is kind of more site-specific to the place, while unpacking Tel Aviv, but also while unpacking the work of Zavi Ifrat. We argue in the work that the architectural objects built in Tel Aviv from 1920s to 30s, referred to as the White City, are purely dressing and redressing of eclectic architectural forms and skins and imageries that were imported from Western Europe and the USA, and there is nothing hidden or unknown about that. Tel Aviv, the White City taxonomy, it was very much against the fabric of Jaffa, which is just a few kilometers away. Therefore, the White City became a mere fancy dress exercise, if we may say it, even a masquerade, dressing to pretend to be somebody else. The modernist, the international style, the garden city, the brutalist, the structuralist, the garden cement, you name it, all were really reduced to a whitewash of modernism, or a market-driven fantastic form-making, borrowing Le Corbusier's component and pasting them on facade. Really, it became a bit of a fancy dress. The skin, which is a symbol of modernity, became nothing but a fake dress without a soul in Tel Aviv. So my kind of free read or take or argument on this is that really the international modernist idea, specifically the international style, when it came to Tel Aviv, seems to suit that Zionist narrative the most, being neutral, universal, rootless, with no association to land or continuation of existing physical or cultural heritage. This Zionist treatment of the physical heritage and the land as a factory open for manipulation or a lab for social engineering, it may be the closest that the Israeli project got to modernist approach. Everything else is a continuous denial and contradiction. In other words, the argument is that really the Israeli project from 1920 to present time is really a form of musification, fashionable forms with no specific style of its own, that's for sure. Ironically, while we kind of like discussing or critiquing this politics of the skin that became an obsession in Tel Aviv then, that was happening at a time where in Europe, international style or the modernist style was completely rejected and even compared with an Orientalist approach, where, and this is kind of like the well-known poster that we're all familiar with in 1927, was trying to actually oppose the international style as an identity for Europe then. But then it was the local vernacular, or claimed to become the local vernacular. All in all, kind of like this idea of the erasure, of erasing history, erasing the history of Palestine in specific, erasing also the modernity of Palestine as if the only modernity or modernism only comes from the West, is really a problematic aspect, where Palestinian culture of modernism became completely absent from history and literature. But also that relationship to cultural production is completely isolated. This whole concept or notion of occupation through imagination has been always embedded within the architectural production, the institutionalized architectural production that was imported from Europe. And that brings us always to this idea of the ethical role of architecture, and also the importance of the power of representation. Probably Palestinian cultural theorist Edward Said best described it as imaginative geography. to refer to this manipulation of space and imagery through space through certain imagery to influence human perception. A Palestinian photographer, Assam Nassar, referred to it as colonization through imagination, whereby describing nothingness and emptiness and silence, construct scenes that provoke, again, this Western biblical imagination and happens to coincide with European colonial expansion. A place like Jaffa, in need of dynamism, vision, and control, results into the white city of Tel Aviv. Often, this Palestinian landscape, with its outstanding natural treasure, in this case of Jaffa, the orange orchard, the unique man-made terraces, the rural and urban setting, always and constantly have been reinvented. And those who actually inhabit the place and cultivate it with their cultural practices and traditions always tend to be left out as if they disturb the scene. That always brings this aspect of representation, nostalgia, and what does that mean in a perspective of a Palestinian architect? This representation, particularly of the coastal city of Jaffa, has been very important from a Palestinian point of view, because Jaffa has always been depicted through its exile art and literature, with a sense of nostalgia, a utopian paradise, the sea, the orange orchards, always waiting for the refugees to return. However, this has never happened. It was nicely represented, or sadly represented, by Edward Said, referring to it as, we too have lost sense of space. We think of Palestine not as an extensive Palestinian state, but as a small, extremely congested piece of land from which we've been pushed. Every effort to rethink it, like the land itself, like the walls and the houses, we've had to get used to working with an already worked over landscape. And that left us always with uncomfortable questions of, what do we do with the city of Tel Aviv? How do we rethink that city? If we are to reclaim Jaffa, what do we do with the white city? If we are to reclaim the vernacular, how do we bring back the soul? Does the white city as it stands form part of this contested heritage of Palestine? Do we dismantle and reclaim the skin as our new heritage, or even our new representation? Is this the new vernacular of Jaffa that we need, or that we want, or that we aspire for? This work has been kind of presented in a form of an installation in Palestine, and this work has been done in collaboration also with Estera, Simran, Bahra, and Sitara. I suppose the aspect that I just wanted to bring from here is, as much as absence has been used as a tool to occupy, how much or how important is it for the imagination to become a tool for liberate? And if I just may say, this becomes really very significant for me, or for my role as a Palestinian architect teaching and working here in the UK. What is my role? Where do ethics stand? And what is it that I teach my students when it comes to modernity? I would like just finish with a small text. For someone who constantly feels unsettled and ungrounded by the fragmentation of the landscape, the personal becomes very political. Navigate between rural and urban as a tool for mental healing, tool to measure personal freedom, but also to reflect on the extent of the Palestinian collective freedom and entrapment. Like many Palestinians in the West Bank, we share an obsession with the Mediterranean, with the intensification of the borderline. None of us who hold the West Bank idea are able to visit. It becomes a distant dream where we realize from afar. We stand on top of our hill and stare through the horizon. Our landscape is schizophrenic by nature, diagnosed with tension of occupation, a landscape with 6 dimensions as described by Ben Vinesti, 3 for Palestinians and 3 for Israelis. I therefore need a 7th dimension of my own creation, one where I can traverse space. In this intentional imaginary world that I would like to empower, I hope to crush colonial reality. Hence, I imagine and I encourage my students to traverse and imagine their own 7th dimension, stripped from colonial lens, especially because we're here in the UK. Thank you.